Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Emily Witt, and I'm the Senior Communications and Media Strategist at Texas Freedom Network and Texas Freedom Network Education Fund. Earlier this year, the Texas Education Agency, TEA, released a new state-developed curriculum infused with stories from the Bible. The curriculum was created as an open education resource infused with stories for K-5 public school students after the passage of HB 1605, which gives the SBOE and state leaders increased power to insert religious and political agendas into public school curriculums. This curriculum instantly rang alarm bells for religious scholars and Texans who value religious freedom, and its existence has national implications. As we all know, what happens in Texas never stays in Texas. Pushing a one-sided religious agenda in our schools is part of a coordinated strategy to plunge our country backward. The authors of Project 2025, the radical political blueprint for a second Trump administration, have even stated that they dismantle the Department of Education and eliminate rights for LGBTQIA+ communities and much more if given the power. Just what does this curriculum have in common with Project 2025? Ben Carson, former Republican presidential candidate and an author of Project 2025, sits on the advisory board for this curriculum. Additionally, 3 delegate members Carson has added to the advisory board are also listed as contributors to Project 2025. Let us be clear today. Our kids in Texas public schools deserve better. They deserve the freedom to learn without political and religious agendas controlling their curriculums, regardless of their zip code, the color of their skin, immigration status, or if they or their family are part of the LGBTQIA+ community. Given everything we know about this curriculum's advisors, we felt it was vital to conduct a neutral, independent examination of these educational materials. Today, we are proud to present the Texas Freedom Network Education Fund's report by Dr. David Brockman, entitled Turning Texas Public Schools into Sunday Schools, a review of the state's proposed K-5 reading curriculum. We'll hear from 4 speakers: Rocio Fierro-Pérez, the political director of Texas Freedom Network and Texas Freedom Network Education Fund; Dr. David R. Brockman, a religious studies scholar, Christian theologian, and non-resident scholar in religion and public policy with Rice University's Baker Institute; Reverend Mark Skrabacz, retired senior minister of First UU Church of San Antonio and member of our Just Texas community, which organizes progressive people of faith; and Arshia Papari, youth political leader and Students Engaged in Advancing Texas, or SEAT, organizer and advocate. After the speakers have finished their remarks, we'll have time to answer questions from the media. You can submit questions in the Q&A box. If we don't have time to get to your question, please email me at emily@tfn.org following today's program. Additionally, you can find our full report at www.tfn.org/teachthetruth following today's press conference. We'll put that link in the chat after everyone has given their remarks. Our first speaker this afternoon will be our political director, Rocio Fierro-Pérez, who has been fighting to stop the politicization of our public schools for years here at TFN. Rocio, thank you for being here today. I'll pass it along to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Emily said, I'm Rocio Fierro-Pérez, the political director of the Texas Freedom Network Education Fund, which, among other things, engages in policy research involving public education and other issues. Now, for nearly 30 years, we have monitored the efforts, especially at the State Board of Education, to politicize textbooks and public school classrooms. We have seen that board censor what students can read about climate change and evolution in science textbooks, distorting the history of issues like slavery and church-state separation in social studies textbooks, and reject responsible sex education and any mention of even the existence of LGBTQ people in health textbooks. And in Texas, sadly, politics are often put before teaching students the truth so that they can learn from our past in order to build a better future, not only for themselves, but for our country. And recently, we have seen growing efforts on the political right to use public schools to promote religious beliefs that not every family shares. And that includes failed legislative efforts to require that all Texas public schools post the 10 Commandments in every classroom. Delegates at the Texas Republican Convention in May even demanded that public schools essentially force Bible study on students regardless of the religious beliefs of those students and their families. So we wanted to know what was really in a proposed state-developed reading curriculum infused with Bible lessons. And the State Board of Education will be considering the approval of this curriculum this fall. And our concerns were heightened when we learned who was actually going to be guiding the development of the curriculum, which is an official advisory panel appointed by Governor Abbott's Education Commissioner, and it is stocked with politicians and political and religious operatives from various conservative groups. Just one of the 10 panelists on the advisory board is an education specialist from one of the state's world-class public universities. That should be a big red flag. And what's even more troubling, by the way, is that this politically slanted advisory panel will now guide the development of state curriculum materials in other subject areas, including science and social studies. We should all be watching very closely in the coming years. Now, David Brockman is a religious studies scholar and Christian theologian with an interest in how educators approach teaching about religion. We asked Dr. Brockman to review this reading curriculum for the TFN Education Fund and report back his findings. Having read that report, I can say that those findings should serve as yet another warning to parents to be wary of those who seek to use the government to favor the religious beliefs of some above all others, especially in their children's classrooms. And let me be very clear that teaching about the influence of religion in our history is an important part of a well-rounded education, but this curriculum is filled with inaccuracies and it risks turning public schools into Sunday schools with parents of diverse religious beliefs left in the dark about what's really going on in those classrooms. Under the deceptive guise of promoting religious literacy, these Bible-based lessons undermine the freedom of Christian as well as non-Christian parents to guide the religious instruction of their own children. So if members of the State Board of Education truly believe in religious freedom and parental rights, they must reject this curriculum when it comes up for a vote in November. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Rocio. Dr. David R. Brockman, a religious studies scholar and Christian theologian, serves as a non-resident scholar in religion and public policy with Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and we'll be hearing from him next. He also teaches religious studies courses at Texas Christian University. A scholar of religion and politics, he has published numerous reports and articles on the coverage of religion in the Texas public school curriculum. In addition to 2 books on Christian theology, Brockman has written extensively about Christian nationalism and its influence on Texas politics. A native Texan, he lives with his spouse, Eleanor Furfang Brockman in Fort Worth, Texas. David, we're so grateful to have you with us today, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for attending this presser. I want to begin by noting that the findings and comments in my report are entirely my own and do not necessarily reflect the positions of Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy or Texas Christian University. So that's that disclaimer out of the way. Let me go ahead and say that the bottom line here for this, in terms of my findings on this proposed curriculum, is I'd call it a missed opportunity. In developing open educational resources, the state of Texas has a unique opportunity to ensure that Texas public school students receive balanced and accurate information about the world's religions that students need to flourish in an increasingly diverse society. Sadly, the proposed curriculum in its current form fails to meet that challenge. After conducting an intensive examination of the curriculum, I found that its coverage of religion is at times inaccurate. It lacks religious balance and too often fails to provide students with neutral, non-confessional coverage of religions necessary for a public school context with its diverse student and teacher population. Specifically, the curriculum contains far too much coverage of Christianity and the Bible, and far too little coverage of other religions that make up American society today. And instead of being religiously neutral, the curriculum tends to promote Christianity over other religions, and in some cases presents biblical texts in a manner more appropriate for Sunday school than public schools. Now, this, of course, is an educational concern about what teachers teach and students learn, but it's also a religious freedom issue, because favoring or promoting one religion over others makes some students and teachers outsiders in their own public schools. So let me go through summarize my 5 key findings. These are all presented in the report. Finding number 1, the proposed curriculum places far too much emphasis on Christianity and the Bible. It offers very limited coverage, or none at all, of other major religions and faith traditions that students are likely to encounter in American society. So, for example, students learn a whole lot about Christianity and the Bible, about the biblical creation and flood stories, the wisdom of King Solomon, Daniel in the lion's den, the life and miracles of Jesus, the Last Supper, the Good Samaritan, the Apostle Paul. Other religions get far less coverage, nothing to that level, if any. Finding 2, one-sided portrayals of Christianity and its impact whitewash difficult historical truths. For example, the 5th grade curriculum, discussing the lead up to the Civil War, positions Christianity entirely on the side of the anti-slavery movement and racial justice. In fact, Southerners who defended slavery and racism often did so on biblical grounds, I am grieved to say. Finding 3. Lessons subtly portray Christian faith claims as straightforwardly true, opening the curriculum to the charge that it is meant to proselytize students. Now, given our time limits, it's a fairly complicated issue here, but given our time limits, just suffice it to say here that the 3rd grade curriculum in particular presents stories about Jesus' miracles and resurrection as if they are straightforwardly historical. And in fact, even Christians disagree over whether the biblical stories about Jesus' miracles are to be taken as literal fact. Finding 4, the authors appear to go out of their way to work detailed Bible lessons into the curriculum, even when they are both unnecessary and unwarranted. For example, in a kindergarten unit that is ostensibly about art appreciation, the text devotes an entire lesson to the biblical creation and flood stories from Genesis, and then quizzes students on the order in which things were created. Finding 5. Though religious freedom is vital to American democracy, the curriculum distorts its role in the nation's founding while underplaying the importance of other fundamental liberties cherished by Americans, such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, civil rights, so on. So in conclusion, I would say that this curriculum is a missed opportunity to ensure that Texas public school students receive balanced, accurate, and neutral information about the world's religions. The curriculum contains far too much coverage of Christianity and the Bible, and far too little coverage of other religions that make up American society today. And instead of being religiously neutral, the curriculum tends to promote Christianity over other religions, and in some cases presents biblical texts in a manner more appropriate for Sunday school than public schools. I'll turn it back to Emily, I believe.
Thank you so much, David. We so appreciate your extensive work on the report, and we really appreciate having your expertise on the call today. Our next speaker that we'll hear from is Reverend Mark Skrabacz, who earned a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Notre Dame and a Master's in Divinity from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley. During his professional career, he worked for 20 years in nonprofit management, was ordained as a Unitarian Universalist minister, and served 3 congregations over 20 years. At the end of this past May, he retired from active ministry and is now enjoying retirement. I'll hand it off to you, Mark.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you all, the organizers, panelists, and all attendees, especially those from the media, for being a part of this experience. I will jump in with my remarks. I grew up and was educated in Texas schools for 13 years, K through 12. These were entirely in parochial Catholic schools. They limited my religious understanding, yet contributed to my curiosity, especially during the subsequent years of my formal education from ages 18 to 30, during which I chose to study world religions, pursue the vocation of professional ministry, earn a Master of Divinity, and receive ordination as a Unitarian Universalist minister. This background rewarded me with the understanding and skills in my professional career to serve a great diversity of people in the development of their own growth in active religious and ethical citizenry of this nation and this world. Now, during my own upbringing and education, my first-generation immigrant parents and family provided me with cultural and linguistic diversity and many experiences of travel, including language immersion courses during which I was able to learn and apply other languages. What grew in me was a thirst for knowledge beyond the limited world and religious education into which I was born and raised. By expanding my understanding of other cultures, peoples, languages, and places, I had to encounter the unknown and develop the capacity to cope with new, surprising, and unexpected aspects of life. In studying the great books and periods of history like the Enlightenment, which greatly influenced our nation's founding fathers, I found hope in the writings of Voltaire, who rejected the Christian nationalists of his day and authoritarian divine right rulers, and was critical of the notion of optimism advanced by philosophers like Leibniz, who believed that since the world was created by God, it must be the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire questioned, and so did I. I see much of this pattern and question it in today's Christian nationalists, many of whom are following a political leader whose primary notion is to shake up our governmental institutions and to act out disruptively because of personal grievances. I'm concerned that this leader doesn't really know enough about his own condition and is offering unwise, selfish, and limited courses of action. I feel that a better developed religious education would provide the public with religious literacy and cultural skillfulness. Today's danger is the promotion of a limited religious education curriculum and narrow life's experiences. The issue we are addressing today is fundamentally about religious freedom, and religious education is an important part of a well-rounded education. But it requires very clear guardrails that protect the religious freedom of all students and their families, not just those who belong to a particular religious faith. As we are discussing today, you can't turn a public school into a Sunday school. But this proposed OER curriculum too often crosses that line. Parents and other taxpayers, regardless of their faith, should be concerned when the government takes action to favor one religious perspective over all others, including in our public schools. That's a real threat to religious freedom anywhere, but especially in a state as diverse as Texas. Let's recognize the value of the truths that all people embrace, and especially all of the world's great religions, that generosity and possibility and imagination are central to a healthy spiritual life. There are many ways to be generous in which the practice of faith calls us. We educate our children. We welcome the stranger at the door. We share our resources with others in need, and we care for our planet. These are values that I feel are integral to beneficial religious education, which is foundational to our American democracy. Yet I'm deeply concerned when any political or educational body attempts to guide the faith of our children in our public schools by favoring one religious belief over another. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. We deeply appreciate having your experience and your thoughts with us here today.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Arshia Papari, an organizer and advocate with SEAT, which stands for Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. Papari is a youth political leader and is currently attending the University of Texas at Austin, majoring in government. Arshia, thank you so much for being here today. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arshia Papari, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm here today to raise a critical concern that affects not only our youth, but the very foundation of our educational systems: the separation of church and state in our public schools. Recently, changes in Texas have led to a new curriculum that incorporates Bible stories into kindergarten to 5th grade English and language arts programs. While understanding the historical role of religion is important, this curriculum doesn't just educate, it imposes a particular religious perspective, which fundamentally challenges the principles of freedom and diversity that our country is built upon. The separation of church and state is more than a constitutional requirement. It is a protection for every student in our schools. It ensures that no one is forced into religious practices or beliefs that aren't their own. This is particularly important in a state as diverse as Texas, where students come from a variety of religious backgrounds or no religious background at all. When the government allows one religion to dominate in public schools, it sends a message that some students' beliefs are less valued, less important, and that is simply not acceptable. As a young person, we are particularly influenced by messages received in schooling. Schools are supposed to be places where we learn to think critically, where we are exposed to a broad range of ideas and perspectives. But when our educational system begins to favor one religious perspective, it stifles the development of that critical thinking. It creates an environment where students feel pressured to conform to beliefs that aren't their own, to fit in, or avoid standing out. This isn't just a theoretical issue. It has real consequences. If our public schools become places where a single religion is promoted over others, it will lead to divisions among students. It would create an atmosphere where those who don't share the majority's beliefs feel excluded or even discriminated against. In a time when we should be encouraging and unity and understanding, these changes will have the opposite effect, driving wedges between students of different backgrounds. Moreover, giving teachers immunity from prosecution if they cross the line between education and religious indoctrination is deeply troubling. It opens the door to potential abuses of power, where personal religious beliefs could influence what is taught in our classrooms. It is not just unfair, it is a betrayal of the trust that students and parents place in our public education system. For younger generations, this issue is massive. Our youth are growing up in a world that is more interconnected and more diverse than ever before. We need an education system that reflects that diversity, that respects the beliefs of all students, and that prepares them to engage with a wide range of perspectives. By blurring the lines between church and state, Texas risks setting us back, teaching us to see the world through a narrow lens rather than embracing the full complexity of our society. To the leaders and policymakers of Texas, I ask you to reconsider the direction in which we are heading. Our public schools should be places where every student feels welcome and valued, regardless of their religious beliefs. We need to protect the separation of church and state, and not just because it is the law, but because it is the right thing to do for our future. And to all our Texas students and our students across the nation, I urge you to speak out. Our voices matter, and together we can ensure that schools remain a place of learning and not places of division. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rocio, and thank you to all of our speakers who have been with us today. David Brockman, who created our report, members of our community, and donors for tuning in as well. For the last 10 minutes of our time together, I'll be asking speakers questions submitted by our attendees. I'll give a few minutes to see if anybody has questions. Okay. One of our first questions, does the report have a call to action on how people can get involved on this? Rocio, can you please take this question away for us?
Definitely. Thank you for that question. So I'll just go over the process for the next steps here. In September, this is the opportunity for the public where you'll have the chance to provide feedback on the proposed curriculum. So that is a great next step to, well, first, to read the report that Dr. Brockman created, which will inform a lot of what is in the curriculum itself, and then showing up to the September board meeting and making your voices heard to the SBOE members. And then after that, in November, SBOE members will take a final vote on whether or not this Bible-infused curriculum will make its way into our public schools. Emily?
Great. Our next question will be for David. Does the report quantify what percentage of the lessons involve Christianity?
Okay, thank you, Talia, for that question. I've been down this road. I've been down this road a few times, and I can't give you a quantitative answer to that question. I'd love to be able to, but I didn't do that with this report. Let me tell you why. When I did a study for also commissioned by Texas Freedom Network back in 2014, and I looked at occurrences. At that time, I looked at occurrences, mentions of different religions in different textbooks and so on. And I found that that particular kind of approach is not very helpful. It's basically just kind of numbers, in other words. Whereas the best way, I think, to do this is to get a feel for the weight of the coverage of one religious tradition over another. And let me just give you a quick example. I mentioned, find my notes here. I mentioned listed many of the things that are mentioned in the curriculum about Christianity. So creation and flood stories, wisdom of King Solomon, Daniel and the lion's den, life and miracles of Jesus, Last Supper, Good Samaritan, Apostle Paul. Okay, so that's just a few of the things that are mentioned in there. Islam, on the other hand, is mentioned. There's one mention of King Mansa Musa from Mali, and that particular and his pilgrimage to Mecca. But the significance of the pilgrimage to Mecca is never mentioned. That is the religious significance, what it means to Muslims, its role in Islam, and so on. So students don't get much about Islam from that particular story. There's another mention of Islam, Muslims in the Crusades, which is really a fairly Christian slanted account of Islam. And then there is one brief mention, a welcome mention, but a brief mention of Islamic contributions to Western civilization. That's pretty much it for Islam. So although I can't give you a percentage, as you can see, there's a whole lot more from the Bible than there is from Islam. And when it comes to Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Sikhism, and so on, little or nothing. So that's why I can't give you a percentage, but there is a real emphasis on Christianity and the Bible in this at the expense of other religions. I hope that's helpful, Talia.
Thank you, Dr. Brockman. Our next question is, with the curriculum possibly coming in November, is anyone attempting to challenge it? Is that something that would happen through the courts, or maybe an administrative rule challenge or something similar? Rocio, can you take this question for us, please?
Definitely, and that's an excellent question. I think the first step in challenging this curriculum starts with this report, right? It calls out all of the points that have been made by David Brockman about why this is not the place. This curriculum does not belong in our public school classrooms. And so next, it would be the public hearing where people are able to come together and make their voices heard with the State Board of Education. If this is adopted in November, I would imagine that our legal partners would seek every avenue possible to challenge this legally because of the clear separation of church and state that would be violated. And so I'm imagining that would be our next steps.
Great, thank you so much, Rocio. The next question I am going to answer, can we speak more to the overlap between the curriculum and Project 2025? The top line is that I think the connection is likely deeper than we realize. But we do know that that Ben Carson, for example, is listed as an author on Project 2025 and is an advisor on this curriculum. We also know that he's put delegate members on the board that are involved with Project 2025. And that's really worrisome considering the content of Project 2025, which speaks deeply to dismantling the Department of Education, which would lead us to having to students only having access, especially in Texas and in rural places, to largely Christian private schools that are funded by our tax dollars. On top of that, there is a lot of speak in Project 2025 around dismantling protections for LGBTQ students. While this curriculum does not necessarily address LGBTQ communities, we do know that it pushes a one-sided view of Christianity, and we're already seeing that spread in other ways in Texas through the chaplain bill that was passed last year. And chaplains who are employed through school districts do not have to leave out the religious bias when talking to students. We already have made it illegal for minors to receive gender-affirming care in Texas. And we know that that's also part of Project 2025, essentially claiming that transgender people do not exist. It's hard to see how there is not a deep connection between the people who are advising this curriculum and the wants in Project 2025 and how we're already seeing that show up in Texas. We also know that this is spreading across the nation. While something like this exact curriculum I'm not aware of in other places because HB 1605 is a unique thing to Texas at the moment, we usually inform what other states do. So our last legislative session, we tried to pass a 10 Commandments bill to put them in every single public school classroom. We failed, but Louisiana was successful in that, and it's likely we'll see that bill come up again. We know that in Oklahoma, the state superintendent, Ryan Walters, is also deeply connected to the Heritage Foundation. He has tapped some of them to reform the social studies curriculum in Oklahoma and has also said that he will require classrooms to teach Bible lessons in their classrooms through different mechanisms, and they're our neighbor. So I do expect that we'll see this spread nationally, and authors and contributors to Project 2025 are behind much of this. I think there's even more to unpack than we know about the deep connections. Thank you so much for that question. Our next question is from Carrie, and I'm going to pass this over to David. Can you talk a bit about the discussion of world religion in the OER and how that compares to discussion of world religion and curriculum materials that are already in use in Texas schools?
Okay, coming off mute. Thank you for that question, Carrie. Okay, first of all, that's an excellent question, and I think that there are a couple of problems related to answering that question. First off, the OER, as you know, is a reading and language arts curriculum. So that's one thing. Whereas in the TEKS and instructional materials that are currently adopted, at least when I last looked at them around 2016 or so, they were generally in the social studies curriculum. Okay, coverage of religion was mainly in the social studies curriculum, not in reading and language arts. So there's a little bit of an apples and oranges situation here. Secondly, the OER is, as I understand it, is supposed to be a classics curriculum or classical curriculum, which, as I understand it, I'm not an expert on classical education, but as I understand it, it's mainly oriented towards Western civilization, rather than the rest of the world. Although this curriculum does have material about areas outside of Europe. So again, a little bit of apples and oranges, because the TEKS are not set up to create a classical education, classical curriculum in the same sense as this OER apparently was designed to do. Okay, all that being said, the OER curriculum runs, as you know, from K through 5. In the social studies where the coverage of world religions mainly resides in the TEKS nowadays is in 6th grade, and in high school world geography and world history. So the coverage of religion that exists is more in the upper grades than in these lower grades. That's a big difference. But as far as the coverage of religions themselves, there is among some of the major textbooks that were instructional materials that were adopted by Texas back in 2014 and then later. Many of those textbooks actually did have fairly decent coverage of world religions. They weren't nearly as imbalanced toward or slanted towards Christianity as the curriculum standards are. So often in and I can't name them right off the cuff, but there were many instructional materials that I was really impressed with at how well they covered Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and so forth, as well as Christianity, as well as some primal religions. So what I'm going to do, if I can figure out how to send you a chat, I'll send you a link to my religious imbalance in the social studies curriculum report that I did for the Baker Institute back in 2016, and you can kind of look that over and maybe do your own comparison with the findings from my current report. Maybe that will help.
Thank you so much, David. I'm happy to connect you and Carrie via email after the program today, so you don't have to worry about that in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. That concludes our questions for today. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Now we're going to drop the report in the chat. It's live now. And we really appreciate, again, all of the members of the press who joined us today, our speakers for being here today, our donors, and our community members. And that concludes for today. Thank you so much. Goodbye.